The machine that keeps the lights on across most of the Pacific Northwest does not run on coal, gas, or nuclear. It runs on snow. 31 federal dams on the Columbia River, and the streams that feed it make more than 22,000 megawatts, enough to power millions of homes. And about 90% of the region's clean electricity comes from this one river system. In March of 2026, the snow that feeds all of it sat at one of the lowest levels seen in 40 years. And here is the part nobody is putting on the news. It had been a normal year for rain. That one sentence is the whole story. The rain came, the snow did not. Across the western United States, the amount of water locked up in the mountains on the 1st of April 2026 was the lowest ever seen for that date, about 65% below normal, the worst since 1981. And the deepest holes in that record sat in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon and Washington, the same ranges that feed the Columbia. So this is not a story about a river that stopped flowing. The Columbia is still there. The water is still moving. The dams are still spinning. The problem is hiding one step upstream, in a kind of storage that does not show up on any lake gauge, and it has been quietly breaking for 20 years. This story does not really start with an empty turbine. It starts with a promise the mountains used to keep. To understand what is at stake, you have to understand what this river actually carries. The Federal Columbia River Power System is 31 power dams lined up along the Columbia and the Snake, run for sale by an agency called the Bonneville Power Administration. Add in every dam on the wider basin, across Canada, Montana, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, and you get about 150 of them. Together, they bring electricity to 60% of the people in the Northwest. They hold more than a third of all the water power in the entire United States. And one wall sits at the center of it. Grand Coulee Dam in central Washington is the single largest power maker in the country. They started building it in 1933 and finished the main wall in 1942, pouring almost 12 million cubic yards of concrete into the canyon, the largest concrete thing in North America. It stands 550 feet tall and runs more than 5,000 feet across the river. Behind it sits Franklin Roosevelt Lake, a lake that reaches 151 miles upstream, all the way to the Canadian border. The way it makes power is plain. Water drops from the height of the lake down through the dam and slams into spinning wheels at the bottom. The higher the lake, the harder the water hits, and the more electricity comes out. At full strength, Grand Coulee puts out 6,809 megawatts, enough for more than 4 million homes, and about 35% of the entire Pacific Northwest power supply. The same dam lifts water 280 feet up a hillside into a second lake and sends it out to water more than 670,000 acres of farmland. The people who run the system call it the Workhorse. Power and food come out of the same wall. The whole setup is one of the cheapest, cleanest, most steady sources of electricity ever built. For 90 years, it has been the thing the region never had to worry about. That is exactly why it is dangerous. Now, look at the timeline, because the cracks are dated. For most of the modern record, a truly bad water year on the Columbia was a rare thing. The low mark for Northwest water power was set back in 2001. For 2 decades, nothing came close. Then 2023 happened. That year, the dams of the Pacific Northwest made less electricity than in any year since that 2001 low. Washington, the country's biggest water power state, saw its output fall 23%. Oregon fell 22%. The two states together dropped 10% below the old 20-year floor. Across the country, American rivers made less water power than at any point in the past 2 decades. And here is the detail that everyone missed at the time. It was not a dry winter that did it. The snow that year was already thin, but what finished it was a heat wave in May of 2023 that pushed the region's temperatures 30 degrees above normal. The snow melted almost all at once. So much water came down so fast that it was more than the dams could hold or even push through their wheels. Water that should have come down slowly all summer ran past the machines and out to the Pacific in a matter of days instead. The bill for that arrived quietly. The Bonneville Power Administration, the agency that sells power from the whole system, ended up looking at a $280 million loss blamed on drought and wild weather. A year later, a second warning showed up. In the spring of 2024, the agency that forecasts the river's flow, told regional planners that the runoff at the Dalles, the gauge that measures most of the Columbia, was expected to be the lowest on record. The lowest on record. And the people watching it changed how they did their math. For decades, they had planned power using numbers that ran back to 1929. They threw out most of it and switched to only the last 30 years, because the old numbers no longer matched the river they actually had. 2025 looked, for a moment, like a break. The snow above Grand Coulee came in around 89% of normal that April, better than the 2 years before it. Then April and May turned warm and dry. By the middle of May, the snow above the dam had already dropped to 84%, and the forecasters watching it kept saying the same thing. The melt was running early. The water supply outlook was falling by the week. Then came this year. By early March of 2026, statewide snow in Washington sat around 53% of normal. Many mountain basins were near record lows. In some places, it was the third worst snow in 40 years. And it happened in a year when the rain gauges read close to normal. The water arrived, it just never turned to snow. What comes next is the part that still does not make sense to almost anyone. Snow and rain are the same water, so why does it matter so much which one falls? Now zoom out, because the land is the answer. The Columbia River Basin starts high in the Rocky Mountains of British Columbia and spreads across most of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and western Montana, with a large piece of it sitting in Canada. Melt from the Canadian peaks in the Kootenai country runs south, through 3 big dams in British Columbia, then hits Grand Coulee and Chief Joseph in Washington, then 5 more dams on the Middle River, then the 4 large dams on the lower Columbia, ending at Bonneville on the Oregon and Washington line before the river reaches the sea. 1 drop of melt can spin wheels a dozen times on its way down. That is why the system gets so much out of so little. It is also why it is so open to harm. Every one of those dams is waiting on the same snow. And the snow is not just water, it is timing. Think of the snow like ice in a glass of water on a hot day. Drop the ice in, and it melts slowly, keeping the glass cold and full for hours. Pour that same water straight from the tap, and you get 1 cold gulp, then a warm, half-empty glass for the rest of the afternoon. The Columbia was built to run on ice in the glass. The mountains catch the winter's water as snow, hold it, and let it go slowly through the dry summer, exactly when the rivers would otherwise run low, and exactly when the need for power and water runs high. A snow drought hands the system, the tap, instead. The same amount of water shows up, but it comes as rain in winter, and as a fast, early melt in spring. It runs off before summer, when nobody needs it, and it is gone by August, when everybody does. The store of water made of ice never forms. And no concrete dam can hold a full year of that the way a mountain range can. This is the quiet emergency. The river can look fine in April and still leave the wheels short in August. The people who measure this for a living are not hiding it. When she briefed regional planners in 2024, Amy Burke, a senior water scientist with the Northwest River Forecast Center, part of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, said the outlook for the river was expected to be the lowest on record, with the worst of it in the Northern Cascades, the Idaho Panhandle, and the Canadian headwaters. John Abatsoglu, a climate scientist at the University of California, Merced, looked at the wider West this spring and said that across many of the big watersheds, the dryness was either as bad as it has ever been or just about there. If you are finding this useful, subscribe. We cover water systems, power grids, and earth science stories like this one every week, with the full picture you need to actually follow what is going on. While the snow was failing on one end of the wire, something else was climbing fast on the other. For most of the last century, the Northwest had a comfortable problem. It made more cheap power than it knew what to do with. That time is ending. The need for electricity in the region is now expected to roughly double over the next 20 years. The single biggest driver is not air conditioning or people, it is computers. Oregon alone now has more than 120 data centers, and more are going up. Microsoft built a cluster of them in Quincy, a small farm town in central Washington that started filling with server warehouses in the mid-2000s, drawn by cheap power and tax breaks. Amazon has a row of them across Oregon. New ones are rising in Hillsboro, outside Portland. A single one of these buildings can pull as much electricity as a small city. One study this year put the new data center load in the region at around 3 gigawatts by 2030, enough to power more than 2 million homes, stacked on top of everything the region already uses. Around the world, the power need from these buildings was on track to double in just 2 years. Pay attention to that number, because it explains the whole problem. Google runs one of these warehouses in the Dalles, Oregon, sitting right on the bank of the Columbia, pulling power from the same river whose snow is disappearing. So the harm does not arrive as one flood or one blackout. It stacks, in order, from the mountains outward. First, the river itself and the fish. The Columbia and the Snake are home to salmon runs guarded by federal law, and the dams already spill water over the top, past the wheels, to help young fish reach the sea. Every gallon spilled for the salmon is a gallon that does not make electricity. The agency's own customers already pay hundreds of millions of dollars a year toward fish and wildlife. In a high snow year, the system can carry both. In a low one, the fish and the power grid are pulled out of the same shrinking river, and the fight over which one gets the water gets sharper every season. Second, the farms. That same Grand Coulee Lake feeds more than 670,000 acres of central Washington cropland. When the river runs low and early, the water that grows the food and the water that makes the power are pulled from the same account on the same falling schedule. Third, the cities and the price of everything in them. Cheap Columbia water power is the reason Northwest electricity bills have been among the lowest in the country for decades. When the dams make less, power companies have to buy backup power on the open market, often at the worst possible moment, at the highest possible price. And those costs land on plain bills in Seattle, Portland, and Spokane. Fourth, the new business the region invited in. The data centers were promised the same cheap, steady, all-day power the dams have always brought. A snow drought is the one thing that quietly breaks that promise, right as that business is being built. Fifth, the grid as a whole. A study of the Northwest power system this year found the region headed toward a shortfall of steady electricity of about 9 gigawatts by 2030. That gap is larger than the entire average power need of the state of Oregon. By the middle of the next decade, the same study put the gap at 14 to 18 gigawatts. Driven by data centers, electric cars, and the move off fossil fuels, the need is racing upward at the exact moment the most steady supply is becoming less steady. And this is not a far-off worry. It already came within an inch of failing. In January of 2024, an Arctic blast dropped over the Northwest. Temperatures dropped hard. Across the region, millions of people turned up the heat at the same hour, and the need climbed toward the top of what the grid could hold. The wind machines slowed. The solar panels, under heavy cloud and short winter days, gave almost nothing. For a few hours, the entire region leaned on one thing. The dams opened up, pushed out everything they had, and held the line. The next move on the operators list was the one they never want to reach: cutting power to homes, schools, and businesses to keep the rest of the grid from falling apart. They did not have to, but they came close enough to see it, and the thing that saved them was water held behind concrete, which is to say, it was last winter's snow. That was a warning sign. So far, it has mostly been treated as a close call rather than a pattern. So, which sentence is the real one? Is the Columbia fine, the way the near-normal river outlook says it is this spring? Or is it failing, the way a record-low snowpack and a 23% drop in power and a region facing a 9-gigawatt shortage all say it is? Why does a system this large, feeding this many people, still hang on a single thing as fragile as how cold one winter happens to be in the high Cascades? And if the snow that ran this region for 90 years keeps coming as rain, what exactly replaces 22,000 megawatts of the cheapest clean power in America, and who pays for it? Nobody has answered that yet. The plans are still being written. The new power plants are still on paper. The data centers are still going up. High in the Cascades, on a ridge above a creek that feeds the river, an automatic snow station sends one more reading down the mountain. The number is lower than it should be for the date. And the snow that is left is already melting, weeks too early, running downhill toward wheels that will not need it until August. By then, most of it will be in the sea.